From Lockstep Technology Group, I am Ali Adib, and this is Closed Beta, the show where we talk to IT and cybersecurity experts, pioneers, and influencers about how we can live and grow in the digital age. In this episode, I talk with Jonathan Kyle, our senior security architect at Lockstep Technology Group, about the current state of cybersecurity, importance of security assessment, and hacking a printer. So, let's talk about you. When did you start, getting into Phil? I know we talked about...
How much detail do you want?
Let's dive in. I don't know. You can, as much as detail you want to share.
Okay. Grew up in South Carolina and really didn't do much in IT stuff at all growing up. Then went to North Greenville University and got my first degree, my undergraduate degree there in video production. And I used that for a year at my church, but then I was really not creative at all. Every bone in my body is destructive, not creative.
Why do you say that?
I just am not good at creating anything. So I was not creative, so I just decided that wasn't good for me. Well, while I was in school there, I did ROTC. So I commissioned as an officer in the military in the U.S. Army on the day I graduated. So. And I was in active duty, so I wasn't reserved. So I had to have it was a full-time job. So I was a lieutenant in the Army and went from there. I commissioned as a signal officer, which is basically anything that has electrons flowing through it is your job. And so went to school for that at Fort Gordon in Georgia, which is where NSA Georgia is. So a lot of the training we did had to do with, radios and things like that, but also with cybersecurity and with cyber and all the different, networks. We had networking, we did Net Plus, A Plus, Security Plus, and all the different courses, and they crammed all of that into our training. And so I went from there to an actual company in the Army where I was a signal platoon leader. And so I was a platoon leader of a satellite retransmission company. So our job was to basically have an entire network from endpoint to a satellite that we would set up from scratch every time our unit went anywhere. So we would set it up, and we had to do, so security was part of that, and it was always interesting to me, but mostly that was about network availability and keeping unclassified and classified networks segregated and things like that. So I went from there to a completely different job because in the military, often you go to different jobs that you don't really have a background in. So I went from there to something called a Security Forces Advisory Assistance Team under the 101st Airborne Division to Afghanistan. And with them, they really didn't have a need for a communications guy as much as they did for counterintelligence. So I got assigned to a counterintelligence team over there, and that's where I got to do the majority of my work with Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency, working as a field agent under counterintelligence in Afghanistan. So our primary job was to hunt for spies that would be working against units that were aligned with coalition forces. So we were specifically tasked with neutralizing counterintelligence threats to coalition forces. So we did a lot of that. I got to do a lot of different things in Afghanistan. Got to do 100 separate combat patrols and a lot of different things. So had a really interesting year in Afghanistan. And then from there, I moved back a little bit into some of the signal stuff, where I was doing some standard jobs in the military as a battalion's operations officer. And I decided that I wanted to get out of the military. And at that point, I decided, I was looking for what career did I want to move into, and I had already had some background in intelligence and cybersecurity. So I decided I wanted to start my master's degree in cybersecurity, and I did. And I already had some background a little bit from my military experience and started my master's degree while I was still in the military. So I was doing that, and I got out and got a job on the outside as a chief information security officer for an auto manufacturer. So this was a manufacturing plant that we made fuel pumps for about 60% of the cars that are out there in the world. And, I was the information security officer for the organization. So I did everything. Yeah, they didn't really have a security officer before that. So it was kind of a start from scratch thing, and then figure out where we were, and then figure out where we needed to be and find. So I got to do everything from, audit preparation to penetration testing, our own environment. And that was a lot of self-taught stuff. So I just kind of figured that out on the fly. And so from there, the company decided to close and move overseas. So obviously a lot of us were going to have to figure out something else to do. And they started allowing us to go get more certifications, and they paid for me to go get my CISSP and a couple pen testing engineer certs. And there's a couple programs for veterans to get cybersecurity. So I used some of those too. And I ended up getting my CISSP, my certified pen testing engineer, certified professional ethical hacker, certified information systems security officer, Security Plus.
Basically, can you name what the stuff that you didn't get?
No. The one I'm really missing that I really want to ultimately do is the OSCP, Offensive Security Certified Professional. That would be one that I really want to get one day. That was the standard for the red team at NSA Georgia.
Oh, okay.
So that was, I can't speak for what it is now. I have no idea what it is now. But at one time, that was one of the standards for getting onto a lot of the red teams. And it's a really good certification, fantastic certification, very difficult. So
how long does it take?
So that one is a practical test. A lot of the tests out there are question and answer, where they're gonna kind of give you a situation and you're gonna answer a question, and they're mostly fairly easy. This one is a 24-hour test straight. It's a straight test, and they basically sit you down in front of a box and say, get in or find stuff. And the test has evolved. I haven't taken it yet, so I can't tell you. This is just, hearsay from other people.
That sounds interesting.
But it's one of the most hardcore tests out there, which is why it was the standard.
Like physically and mentally, right?
Right. It's tough. It's tough. Yeah. If you go, you can read some horror stories on the internet of people trying to pass the OSCP, but Can you get in, get out, like for bathroom and stuff, or is it just? I don't know. I haven't taken it.
You're like locked in.
I think you're supposed to bring food, and they have a bathroom there and stuff like that. But yeah, I've had a couple buddies take it, and they've had some pretty interesting experiences. I think they allow you to bring some of your own tools now, which may really helps you speed up the 24-hour process.
Okay.
So if you write certain scripts or programs ahead of time that do certain functions, it would really help you speed up that process. But it's still a really tough test. So I don't have that one, and that's one I want eventually.
Okay. Well, first, let me thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to ask, because I find it very fascinating, like you've been through like unrelated stuff like a couple of times, right, from video to, like, where was that? Like, when did you learn most of your stuff? Was it through military, or was it through the certification that you took?
The cyber stuff?
Yeah.
You learn most stuff by yourself.
Oh, really?
There's no question about that.
Okay.
Some of the best guys that I've learned from in the past have 0 certifications in education, 0. And they stand up a virtual environment at their house, and they'll put a Windows 7 box on there, or they'll use Hack That Box, or there's DVWA, which, pardon my language, it stands for Damn Vulnerable Web Application. And it's like there are resources out there that allow you that are significantly positioned for teaching people how to attack them.
Oh wow!
And honestly, a lot of the stuff you can find on YouTube. So Kali Linux, which is the operating system that most attackers use to because it has a lot of the tools pre-built into it, and you can do a lot of research into where that came from and all that, but. It's a free operating system that you can download from the company that maintains it, which is Offensive Security. And it has lots of tools. All the tools that you really need to do the majority of basic attack are preloaded into Kali Linux. And you can get on YouTube and teach yourself how to use most of these things. I mean, it's not difficult, which is why we see people at, kids at K-12 schools all the time that are poking around and stuff like that. They make mistakes, but.
So the question I have is that why it's so accessible for people to like kind of hack into, or like the threats are so high?
Yes, it is. So there's a couple reasons for that. One is that, yes, the operating system is free. The knowledge is free. And it doesn't take, this ain't rocket surgery. So it's fairly easy to figure out some of the basics of reconnaissance. So the first step in pretty much any offensive action is reconnaissance. You got to figure out what's out there. And the other problem is that people aren't doing the basic things to protect themselves from those probes. So, let's say you don't have anything that you're monitoring on your network to look for signs of scanning or reconnaissance or anything like that. You're not going to pick that up. And then when somebody that's curious does that the first time, they don't get discovered and they find things that might lead to something else, they're going to keep going. And they say, oh, well, here's another box that I can see and I can ping it. Oh, well, let's try a remote shell. Let's try to get something else on it. Let's see if we can, does it do this, that? Is it vulnerable to this? Well, let me try to do a vulnerability scan, which moves into, active, that's active probing. And then the other problem is, open source stuff. So, a huge thing is Google hacking, which is open source hacking, which is basically just using Google to find vulnerabilities and things that are just out there on the internet. Super easy to do. There's open source information all over the internet, which basically just means you're using information that you find open on the internet to do things. For instance, looking at your Facebook page for answering your security questions when I'm trying to reset your password.
Is that still a thing?
Oh, God, yeah. It's all over the place. We do open source intelligence investigations to kind of show people what's out there. We used to do this when I was in counterintelligence too. Just kind of showing people what's out there, what they put on social media, what they do this. And it might not be you. The problem might be your grandma that is not as careful as you. In fact, that I use that as a reference because I've done that in a recent example where somebody was very close, not to mention their kids' names, but grandma did. So I can find your kids' names and where they live and what they look like and all that because you're careful, but other people aren't. So it's not always you that loses the information. Sometimes it's another company. Sometimes it's another person that loses your information. So it's just, there's way too much information out there.
Yeah. So, you brought up the companies that, you and I have been talking about for the past few weeks about like security and the data breaches. So what do you recommend, knowing all this stuff, the companies should take, what steps they should take to kind of like secure our information or even their clients' information or their own information?
Oh,
where do I begin, right?
A lot. Right. Yeah. Where to begin is really so to individuals, I think the message is your information's out there. There's not really a point in keeping your data from being exposed at this point. I would say you didn't lose it. Someone else lost it for you. If you look at things like Equifax and some of these others, where more than a quarter of the country's socials are just out there. They're just wide out there and there's nothing you can do to get it back. You really kind of just have to change your focus from keep my information from being breached to how do I protect my identity? That's what you got to do now is watch your identity for what someone would do with that information that's malicious. To companies, it depends on which side you're coming at this from. So if you're coming at this from the consumer side, you probably want to do something about making the government keep them accountable for losing that information because frankly, right now, not much happens. Besides, you can, do a lawsuit or something like that against the company, but I don't know, maybe there's not much else that's going to happen. From the company's standpoint themselves, security needs to be something that's driven from the top. And what I mean by that is it's not your IT administrator's job to just figure it out and for everybody else in the company to just assume that everything's going to be okay. It really has to be driven from the top to create a culture in the company where security matters because otherwise it's not going to go anywhere.
That's interesting. One of the questions that I want to ask you kind of relates to that is like the foundation of the security audit. What is that? Is that something that you guys kind of go in proactively, company hires us and then going in and sending like, here are the security risks that you have?
So you're talking about the foundational security assessment?
Correct.
Okay, so our foundational security assessment, we developed this out of the need for getting a lot of information for a lot less time and cost than we've done so in the past. So in the past, we used to do these huge, 400-hour assessments where we do a full NIST audit, we do penetration testing, we do a full risk assessment, and we do everything. And we still do that. We can still do that. But a lot of times we found that companies, one, can't afford it, two, don't have the time to commit or resources to commit to that to assist in the actual investigation and audit. And then three, they don't need that because we would hand them a 300-page book of stuff to fix. And if they devote 2 or 3 people to just fix that stuff, by the time they finish it all, it's a moot point because it's all changed by that time anyway. So we really wanted to say, okay, what are the things that everyone, no matter what environment you're in, needs to look at in order to have a baseline of security across the environment. So we sat down and we had one of our more senior engineers who's been doing this a long time. We gave them time to develop a way to gather this information in a much more concise and quick way, and only the information that's really needed. So the things we wanted to focus on in this were internal and external vulnerability scans. So external vulnerability scan of all your internet-facing hosts. Internal vulnerability scan with credentials. So this is generally like a Nessus scan with domain admin credentials, just because it's less intrusive and gives you more data and is faster. We scan a subset of workstations, servers, and all the domain controllers for compliance with the CIS controls based on the operating system that it's running. And then the real focus after that is Active Directory itself. So Active Directory is generally the primary management tool that most administrators use in environments to manage objects and users. What permissions you have in the environment. This is not only for your individual machine, but also for your permissions on the network, where you can get access, different settings on all computers across your network. Lots of things are administered in Active Directory, and it's very important. When you can't scan Active Directory for vulnerabilities like you can the domain controller or server that it actually lives on. A lot of the things in Active Directory are the primary target of an attacker, but they don't show up as a critical red vulnerability like they would in a vulnerability scan. A lot of that has to be gathered data that we pull using PowerShell and some proprietary tools that we've developed, and then analyzed by an Active Directory professional who can look at those and say, this OU or this group has too many permissions, or recently we've seen one where there's permissions are granted at the root of the domain to the group everyone, which is anybody who's listening and heard that is cringing right now, because it's the worst possible thing you could do. And it's not that would flag on our vulnerability scan. That has to be looked at, exported and looked at by a professional to say, whoa, this is really bad. This is a really bad setting you've got here. And so we pull a lot of things out of Active Directory, privileged groups, standard default accounts, who's in each of these groups, what permissions do they have, what's your OU structure look like, what GPOs do you have for each of your computers. And we take a look at all that and then provide recommendations on how to fix a lot of those things. So with all of that together, we really cut down on the time it takes us to gather all that data. And we're huge PowerShell fans, so we've automated a lot of that stuff so that we really cut down on the cost of the foundational assessment. So what we're really trying to focus on out of this is get you, I want to backstep a little bit. When you do a penetration test, it's, not just one step. There's usually 8 or 9 steps that it takes you to get to checkmate, which is usually, adding an account or using an account in the domain admins group, which gives you pretty much as many permissions as you want. We want in the foundational assessment to focus on as many step 1s and 2s as possible. So as opposed to going all the way to a step 8 or 9 as you do in a penetration test, we wanted to find as many 1s and 2s as we can across the entire environment to kind of shut that down at the beginning of the process, to show you as many of those easy things that we can find at the beginning. And it generally provides you lots of work to do. So on that, we never like to just hand you your assessment results and then say good luck, have fun with that. We always like to offer help. So, specifically fixing things in Active Directory is always scary. Nobody likes to change things in Active Directory because you can mess up everything in the environment. So something we've done is learn how to audit the environment and then fix things in a way that's not going to break everything across your network while making it more secure. An example of this would be something like SMB signing. By default, everything's got using SMB version 1, which allows for relay attacks and a lot of different things. Need to turn it off, but it's by default on. You can't just turn that off without knowing what's using that in your environment before you turn it off. Like maybe you've got a whole bunch of legacy printers that are still using SMB version 1. Don't just turn it off because then nobody's going to be able to print, right? We know how to do that to help people fix that without breaking everything in the environment. So that's really where our foundational assessment came from. I know it was a mouthful.
Why would anyone need that?
Everyone needs it, is the point.
Okay.
So the point is everyone does. If you're concerned about a secure environment, you need it done. You need somebody to come in and check these things. And then again, the reason we did this is we cut it down to the minimum things that everybody needs to do to secure their environment. No matter if you're in healthcare, finance, the legal, a K-12 school, no matter where you are, everybody needs to look at the things we've done in this. This is, as baseline as we can get on some of the things you need. Do you have Windows machines? You need to do this. Do you use Active Directory? You need to do this. That's kind of why we did that, is because everybody needs it. And it's information that will be valuable to you should you have Windows machines, should you use Active Directory, which is more than 90% of most of our customers. So that's where it came from.
Do you have any horror stories?
Yes.
Can you share any of those?
So one of the keys about being in intelligence was pulling out specific pieces of information that make things classified and not classified. So I did this for the government. Being very careful, yes. I kind of provided one a minute ago, which was that we found one OU that allowed the group everyone in Active Directory permissions to the root of the domain. That's really, 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 really bad.
How often do you see that though?
That one's rare. I mean, that was a specific time. Other things we see regularly, and it should be a horror story everywhere, but we still see it, is things like Eternal Blue everywhere. So Eternal Blue is an exploit that could have been developed by the federal government. I can't confirm or deny whether that occurred. Go Google it. That was incredibly, it's a 12 on the 1 to 10 scale on remote code execution. So it uses it's one of the worst exploits out there for getting remote code execution, which is generally some of the worst exploits out there that allow you to remotely perform functions on a box as system or as root. It wouldn't be root in this case; it'd be system because it'd be Windows. It's a Windows exploit. But that. So the WannaCry and Petya, or not Petya, I can't remember which one it was, used this after it came out and spread across Maersk, and there were a lot of horrible breaches that occurred from that. That was 2017. Microsoft, so this came out, and I believe it was either February or March of 17. This came out, it was released. Microsoft releases a patch a month later, and the WannaCry didn't kick off until May of 17, which means there was a patch out there for 2 months before this happened, which means if you're taking care of it, if you're doing right in your environment, it's not going to matter because the patch blocks that from occurring. We're still finding this everywhere today. It's 2019, and we're still finding Eternal Blue, and Bluekeep came out a couple weeks ago. Bluekeep's another really bad remote code execution, we still find ones that are very old in these environments, and it really kind of demonstrates the security posture and where the organization's mind is on cybersecurity, because there's been patches out for years for this, and this is as bad as they get. So.
Man, I was just thinking like the amount of money it will cost to just solve that after the breach happens.
Oh, right. So it's free. Yeah. So it's free to fix it. You just download the patch and install it. You just download it and patch. This is not rocket surgery again. You download and patch it. And come on. So what's possible with this full domain compromise? If you have, like, let's say I have a a Windows 2008 server that I haven't patched because nobody wants to touch it because it does something important in my environment. So don't patch it. Nobody touch it. Well, if it has Eternal Blue on it, and I exploit it that way, and you've had a domain admin that's logged into that recently, which I'll bet you have. I would bet money that you have if you haven't patched. It's game over. That's the end of the story.
Here's a question. Here's a question that I'll probably like the ignorant people like I do would ask is like, is it Microsoft typically like take care of the auto updates and stuff? So it'd be like kind of covered on that?
Oh, no. So it's very rare to find auto update.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. It's very rare. Well, the reason being is because updates crash things.
Yeah.
Updates mess things up all the time. There's generally, I think Microsoft recommends 2 weeks or something like that. But it's very rare in a managed environment. So, if you've got an environment where all your users use their own machines and they're not joined to the domain or whatever, yeah, sure, turn it on. But if you're in a domain and you're on a domain joined computer, it's pretty rare to have auto updates. That's very rare. Generally, the admins always want to push the updates themselves. And the best practice, obviously, is to have a test environment. You have a test machine that's configured the same way all your users' machines are. You test the update, you install the update, you test it, make sure it's not going to crash anything, and then you push it out. So it's very rare to actually see auto updates. And because of that, because updates mess things up, for a long time there was this idea in all admins, and they were like, no, nobody touch anything, nobody patch anything, nobody, but that's just not an option. Simply not an option because, what are the consequences of not patching for Eternal Blue? Well, how much does your entire network infrastructure cost? Yeah, that's the question. How much does your entire infrastructure cost? How much does your brand cost? I can do anything I want at that point, anything I want. So you tell me.
That kind of reminds me of the whole ransomware that's happening recently.
Well, yeah. And they use most ransomware, WannaCry, for instance, WannaCry. Eternal Blue. It was its infection method for, I believe so, and don't quote me on it. I believe WannaCry's infection method was using Eternal Blue, or its initial owning of the system before it actually performs the drive encryption. So they use these. When these come out, you can bet. So Bluekeep came out a couple weeks ago. You can bet there will be a ransomware strain soon that uses Bluekeep to propagate.
So how do you prevent for that? Obviously for patching, but that's it.
You patch it. There's other things you can do. A lot of endpoint protection models out there, you take your pick, Cylance or Traps, or a lot of them claim that they can protect you from those. A lot of network devices that can see the traffic will protect you from that. You turn on your firewalls, host-based firewalls. Man, nobody turns on host-based firewalls because they don't want to troubleshoot through fixing all that stuff. That'll help a lot of things. But patch the system. It's a free patch. Just patch the thing. I mean, it sounds stupid, but it happens in so many places. So many places aren't doing the easy things that you need to do to secure your environment that are free. I mean, not everything requires a big shiny fancy weapon to protect yourself from all these things. A lot of them are free. Like patching. So, there's a lot of things you can do to protect yourself. And a lot of people just aren't doing them.
Here's the question is I'm looking at a cost and benefit thing. How much does it cost to do the foundation audit assessment versus to how much it will actually cost? You talk about branding and how much your infrastructure is worth.
So, I don't worry about the costing. That's usually our sales team that worries about that. But I do know that we do it in way fewer hours than a lot of the other assessments are, and that costs way less. So that's usually not something I worry about. I worry about fulfilling the work within the amount of time we are allotted to finish it. I know that it's like a quarter the cost of a lot of the ones we've done in the past.
Oh, wow.
So it's far less than a lot of the assessments we've done in the past. I would say at least a quarter, maybe more, or less, or less of the cost of some of the ones we've done in the past. So, much cheaper. And that's why we made it.
Yeah.
That's why we made it.
So why do you think not everyone is utilizing this kind of services, not just ours, but overall, why are there so many breaches? Why not taking precautions too?
Because it's just like selling insurance. So until something bad happens to you, you can read 1,000 articles about how bad this is. Like I saw one the other day. It was like how many billions of records were stolen this year, and it's insane. So you can read all those articles, but until you have to sit down and figure out in your budget where you're going to put this stuff, is it really going to meet the top? Now, granted, let something bad happen, and you'll find money for it. Because all of a sudden, what's the cost of this? Oh, somebody breaches in and they phish somebody and they steal somebody's paycheck. No. What could happen with this is, your business collapses. Like, let's say you're a healthcare records company or something like that, and somebody breaches you or phishes one of your users and they steal data. Well, stealing data is not just the only thing that's going to happen there. Well, if they let out that it was your company that they stole the data from and you manage records, you don't have a business anymore. Who's going to come to you anymore? So your entire business will fall apart. So it just depends, if in the future, as we move into things, so the European Union just passed GDPR, which is a very, very heavy penalty for breach of PII. California just passed one. It's very, very similar to GDPR. You can bet that other states will do the same soon, if not the federal government. And when that occurs, the cost of, you're not only going to have the cost incur of being breached, you're also going to have the cost of fines, fees, lawsuits, and all this kind of stuff. I've seen some figures that say it's like 2 to 4 times more expensive to be breached than it is to meet all your compliance requirements. And then you're compliant and you have some certification or, something like that, and you don't get breached. So, honestly, it's just like insurance. Do you really need life insurance? Well, not till your neighbor dies. Right. And then you see what happens to them. Right. So that's one of the difficult things about this. Some people are forward thinking and are willing to say, yeah, looking at the data available to me in the world and how bad and how often this happens, we need to do something about this. And other people are just not willing to do it.
Yeah.
And bad things happen.
Yeah. I'm just looking at recent example, the Baltimore City, the ransomware, and they just lost, I don't know how many hundreds of $1 million.
Yeah. And you can't pay it. Oh, I think it was $18 million.
Was it $18 million,
I believe?
I thought it lost a lot of money.
No, it was around 8. Well, I mean, so the other thing there is the attacker wants $100K or so, $100K to unlock your systems.
Yeah.
But you can't do it. You can't do it. Don't do it. As soon as you pay it, this guy's is an international hacker. You have no idea if he's actually going to decrypt your systems or not. He might just not do it just because it's Tuesday. The other thing is, as soon as you do, you immediately go on the will pay for ransomware list. So as soon as you do that, it tells you're not going to fix all the holes in 2 days, right? So it's telling all the people out there that do this as a service, because you can do this, you can buy ransomware as a service on the dark web, that you will pay for it. So, wait another 5 days. Somebody's going to be trying to do it again. So you can't pay it. You can't pay the ransom, even though it's cheaper. You can't pay the ransom. And back up your systems. You back them up and make the backups a way that you can't, you got to segregate those backups so that if you have an infection in your primary systems, they're not going to get to the backup, so you can just restore from whatever backup it was. If you're doing them nightly, great. Go ahead. I'm going to lose 1 day of work, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just those things. And frankly, a lot of these ransomware strains use things that can be patched. You just patch and it can't spread or propagate or something like that. It's a kind of an endless cycle.
Is that how it feels? Like you try to constantly catch up to what's...
I was listening to... when I was still in school, I was listening. They had a panel at school, and one of them was the head of the red team, or actually this guy was head of the blue team at NSA, and it was several years ago. And he said, somebody asked him, what have we really accomplished in cybersecurity in the industry so far? And he said, well, the only kind of security we've created so far is job security. And that's really true. I really feel like we're chasing our tails a lot on this. Not that you can't create a secure environment and really stalwart yourself against 99% of the bad guys out there. You can do that in your organization. But as a whole around the globe, this is just out of control. I mean, it's rapidly expanding. More and more bad guys are joining the fight every day because it's an easy way to make money and it's very low risk. You know, if you come up and try to rob me, something really bad might happen to you. But you know, if you try to steal money from me over the internet, good luck. Nobody's ever going to catch you unless you're really dumb. Unless you make a mistake. When I was writing a paper when I did my master's degree. This was several years ago, and I'm not quoting a statistic because I don't remember exactly where the source was. FBI crime data, but it said that year, I think it was 14 or 15 or something like that. The FBI, I think it was $38 million had been stolen physically in the United States, and 3 of that had been recovered by law enforcement later. The figure for cybercrime was $750 million, and 0 had been recovered. So it was, again, don't quote me on the statistic. I don't remember where that was, but it just goes to show that they're figuring out that there's significant risk if I try to rob a bank, and it's probably not going to go well. However, I can steal digital money and nobody's the wiser. They're not going to find me, and I can keep doing it. Nothing's going to happen. So until you become a really big fish and you get targeted by people that matter.
So you mentioned this a couple of times. You said the red team and the blue team. What are those?
It's just lingo. Red is offensive, blue is defensive. So the red team is generally the adversary. And in lingo, the red team means the good guys that act as adversaries. So they're the pen testers. They're the guys that are performing the audits and assessments and trying to get in. Blue team are the defenders, the guys that are trying to keep the attackers out. So they have a harder job, in my opinion. Blue team's job is a little harder. Reds can be more frustrating. If blue's doing a good job, reds can be frustrating. In fact, one of the offensive security, these are the guys that maintain Kali. One of their mottos is try harder. So that's kind of the thing is if you're a red team guy, you just try harder, keep going, try something else, try it again, try it in a different way. And then blue team's motto is good luck, I guess. I don't know. It's really tough being a blue team guy in a real environment, just because, especially if you don't have permission to change things regularly. Let's say you have a huge environment and you're trying to do your best, but there's a lot of red tape to get a change made. Let's say in your organization, in order to change the password character length from 8 to 14 characters is, a mountain to move. Maybe that's the whole thing you try to do for a year. A lot of times that's the case. Nobody wants, the CEO's like, I don't want to change my password to 14 characters. No, I don't want to do that. And so there's a lot of things that can keep them from succeeding in their organizations. So they have a tough job.
That is interesting. Like a red and blue, kind of like a black hat and white hat.
Yeah. So the difference there, a black hat is a bad guy, and a white hat is a good guy generally. And then a gray hat is somebody who's in the middle somewhere. You can find a lot of people on all those sides, but generally that's where that is. So that lingo is generally, there's black box testing and white box testing, and those are not necessarily evil and good. Those are, no knowledge. I'm acting as a real attacker would be a black box test. And then a white box test is I'm acting as, an administrator in the environment trying to secure it and figure out exactly where the holes are, with full knowledge of the environment. And then gray is, again, the middle between those two 10%, right? So a lot of lingo. I hope that's not confusing.
No, that was excellent. That was very simple the way you broke it down. So in your expertise, how do you put the outlook of the current cybersecurity now? Are we doomed? No. We're not doomed. We just have a lot of work to do. And we have to do it. So a lot of people we see are not bad people that are not willing to work. A lot of the time, what we see is an administrator who is overworked and wants to fix things, but just gets pulled into 1,000 other things. IT is one of the most overworked industries out there. They have 2 people and they need 6, and they're all doing those jobs. They have 10 people but need 30. So it's a super understaffed department usually in places we find, or they are staffed right at their limits and they can't undertake a huge thing like securing the environment, security architecture, things like that. That's where we come in.
We really can help people create those things and even do them for them if they wish. We don't like to do that. We like to teach. We like to help people understand why we're doing what we're doing and help them figure it out so that they can do it themselves. But a lot of times what we see is just people that, look, I don't have time. I ain't got time for this. I've got to keep the network up. So they need help. They just don't have the time to do it. And they are not given the time or resources to do it until something bad happens. And that's unfortunately what happens a lot of the time. So no, we're not doomed. We just need to provide the people that manage our infrastructure and resources with the resources they need to make it happen. And a lot of times that just doesn't happen.
Okay. Do you think that going towards the automation AI will kind of help us, I would say the blue team, and then kind of like provide more ammunition for the red team? Or is it kind of like an equal base? Or who's going to win, basically? That's what I'm saying, in the future, in your opinion.
Well, nobody's going to win, hopefully. So AI is one of those words. It's one of those catchwords, right? That's a marketing word.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I hate the marketing words. If you say single pane of glass, or if you say AI or machine learning or blockchain or something like this, I usually stop listening because it usually just means you have an algorithm that looks for certain things and then keeps that data to reference for future decisions, right? That's what machine learning. It's not like Skynet. It's
No.
It's not what we're talking about here. It's not a matrix, right?
Yeah.
It's just it's an algorithm that was written to predict certain things in an environment, which are really good. Some of those are really good programs. So I'm not saying they're useless. We usually like to strip away the marketing stuff and say, okay, what is this? What does it actually do? How does it actually work?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of really good tools out there. You don't have to. So here's the other misconception. You can always go to the market best, and it is going to usually be the best tool in that environment. And it's going to be big and expensive and shiny. And there are also lots of free tools out there. There's a lot of free tools out there that do what a lot of those. Now, granted, it's not going to have all the bells and whistles. It's not going to have all the functionality. It's not going to have the best security capabilities, but it's better than not having anything. It's better than what you got right now. And there's a lot of things out there that work for those environments. And we can help put a lot of those up that are, not necessarily paid for solutions that are going to break your bank or you didn't budget for. So just because you don't have a huge budget for an IAM solution, an identity and access management solution, let's say, don't stop looking because you just know you don't have the money for it. There are ways around this that you can use to secure your environment without bankrupting your organization.
That's awesome. I want to talk about the hacking through a printer that I've been hearing about.
Which one?
Which one?
Yeah, we've done it a couple times this year.
I've only heard it one time.
Well, we've done it several.
What is that?
This what you're specifically referencing is one of our messages this year is IoT Security. And we've done this at a couple different conferences now. We actually have demonstrated the attack online live on stage, just because we've used it twice in pen tests this year. So, to get to full domain compromise.
Who do you attack though? Do you just pick random people or?
Oh, no. We bought one of the printers. So we actually found one of the printers we used and that was in the environment. We attacked and bought one and exploited it just to show where it is. So one of our messages is IoT security. So let's say you do have a good patching program. You patch your servers, you patch your workstations, you patch your DCs, you patch, all that kind of stuff, and you're doing good. Well, now there's an increase in the number of devices and environments that aren't workstations, servers, domain controllers, things like that. They're non-regular devices. So specifically, some of the ones we've seen in tests so far this year have been smart boards. They've been printers. They've been, climate control systems inside of the buildings. A lot of these things have underlying operating systems that are just like your printers, that are just like your workstations and servers. They have some form of Linux-based operating system. We've seen a smart board that had Windows 7, which means Eternal Blue is good to go, and that's what we used in that case. And there are a lot of these things out there that are not part of your patching schedule. And specifically in printers cases, a lot of times companies have a contract with another organization to manage their printers for them, and they're not allowed to touch them, right? So it's sitting on your domain, and it has these horrible vulnerabilities, and you're not even allowed to touch it. So in this specific case, what we wanted to do is show how you really need to start thinking about these IoT devices on top of all the ones you're already doing. And so this specific one, we bought a printer, a factory printer, and set it up on a basic LAN. And basically we just, pop a Kali Linux box on there too, pull an IP with the printer, and we're in the same subnet. And we perform a basic in-map scan so you can see the printer. That's the first step, is reconnaissance there. And even in the in-map scan, it'll show you possible exploits. So we're at this point, we're not even doing a vulnerability scan. In this particular demo, what we're doing is showing that the in-map scan shows up with a Metasploit module that exists for the specific printer. Then you basically just load the module in Metasploit on your Kali Linux box and attempt to exploit it on the printer that you can see, and it works. There's a lot of technical data you can get into on what it actually does to cause remote code execution on that printer, but basically it allows you to get logged back into the printer once it reboots, and you can get root at that point. So you go straight to root. And then for any pen tester out there, they know that once you have root on any kind of Linux box, that's system on Windows, it's full permissions on that box. So at that point, basically, we can pull the hashes out of the cat etc shadow file that's sitting on that operating system, and then it's really easy to crack those hashes, and then you've usually got a domain account, because a lot of times what that account on the printer is either a domain account or it's a default local account. And then you own the printer, but if there's a domain account logged in or other local administrator accounts logged in or whatnot, you can usually use that to laterally move, or at least create persistence inside the environment, which basically means I have a foothold. I can go something I can, move from in the environment that's not my Kali Linux machine. So that's what we do on stage is show how quickly we can root one of those printers, and then what we can do from that. And basically our message is proper network access control with port level security and things like that to make sure you're segmenting devices properly. So let's say you can't patch it, for instance, segmenting them off in a network so you can't laterally move from that printer into other valuable targets like a domain controller or server or other workstation.
That is interesting. Kind of reminds me of my mind as kind of like levels of a building, how I'll be able to lock something in a room and not be able to access it, or have someone have access to it.
Right.
It's interesting.
Right. Yep. So that is kind of the idea there. If you want to simplify NAC, is putting things in the right place. So let's say you have everybody can access the first floor, and only certain people can access the second floor and third and fourth and so on, so that only certain people can get access to the things that are valuable. And you put all your valuable things at the top, right? So people can get in, and then you make sure people can't parachute in on the top and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of getting stupid, but
I love it. Thank you for listening to Closed Beta. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, please review, like, and share with your friends and colleagues. Closed Beta is produced and hosted by me. If you have any questions, please visit our website at lockstepgroup.com. Until the next episode, have a great week.